Mr. President, members of the board, your second agenda item tonight is a 2011 progress report update from the Los Osos Fire Safe Focus Group. They're here present with you. They elected me to continue talking, even though we tried to get them up here. I believe one or two of them may come up here in a little bit, but we'll go from here. The goal of this presentation is just to give you an update of what we've been doing and working on this year, and to introduce the group and try and solicit additional support from the community. So to start off first, just so you have an idea who's here, we have, again, Mr. Wright over there. Thank you. You're going to be Mr. Wright for a long time. Vita Miller in the back. Jim McCallan. And Lee Golden. And I don't believe I missed anybody. And Mike Wright. Mike Wright, the other Wright. There you go. You are standing up. All right. So let me give you a quick history on what we've been doing. This was actually started. This group was actually started in 2008. They're subordinate to the San Luis County Fire Safe Council. That is a fire safe council made up of government, private citizens, stakeholders, and industry to come up with programs to reduce the wildland fire severity of San Luis County. Together, they've got, or collectively, they have probably 5 or 6 focus groups throughout the county. Some are more busy than others. Los Osos has been very, very active in the last couple of years. One of the first things that they did was to try and figure out what's the wildland fire danger in Los Osos. So we developed the Los Osos Community Wildfire Protection Plan. Again, that was brought before this board, and several of you actually helped us work on it. To prepare this Community Wildfire Protection Plan, it's about a 35-page document. We brought a bunch of stakeholders together from the community, industries, local landowners, government entities with oversight, such as the Fish and Wildlife Service, state parks, and we tried to figure out what are the possible wildland fire hazards in Los Osos. So we did a pretty deep assessment of that, and then we tried to come up with different mitigations to address those wildland fire hazards. Once that was done, we went through a couple of different stakeholders meetings, showed it to the public, brought it before this board, brought it before the Emergency Services Committee a couple times, and got final buy-in, and then this board signed it. Once it's signed by the board of directors, it goes to your local fire chief. At that time was Chief Jenkins. He signed it, and then from there it goes up to Sacramento to the California Emergency Management Agency, which at that time was Cal OES. What that wildfire plan does is it allows you to stand on a document, a large document that says, hey, there's some wildfire issues here, and then to go out and secure grants, and which is part of the reason we're here, is we're able to get those grants. If you look at the, and there is a printed version of this document at each of your desks as well. If you look at that, at the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, we identified a bunch of areas in and around Los Osos. All these areas in yellow that you're looking at, those are wildland areas in and around the homes. And so we wanted to figure out where a wildfire could start and where it would threaten the homes, and then try and assess that and deal with it. So that's kind of an overview. There's a lot of acres in here. There's a lot of land. And a lot of homes that are currently at risk. This is what we consider a very high wildfire severity zone, and out over here is a moderate, based on our CAL FIRE maps. Of course, some of these areas are sensitive habitats, some of these areas are private holdings, and some of them are public holdings. So it doesn't mean that we're going to do everything, or we're going to do projects on all these properties. It just means those are the areas that the community is at risk at. The CWPP, or the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, identified that most of the vegetation in and around Los Osos is well over 40 years old, meaning it's a very mature class. It's very decadent. There's lots of dead underneath it. Some of the areas, the vegetation is even older. There's very little fire history in Los Osos or around Los Osos. Talking to some of the larger landowners outside, They used to burn on a regular basis through the 20s and 30s. It kind of stopped around World War II, and there hasn't been a lot of fuel management since then. And a lot of it is just in recent history, it's because we've identified it as an endangered species habitat. And so it's trying to work with the various stakeholders to make sure that if we're going to try and improve the habitat for one species, we're not hurting the habitat of another species. So the last bullet point here is, as we look at this, one thing that's important to remember is that firefighters report, and we've seen this, is in Los Osos you get typically slow-moving but very intense fires because they're such heavy fuel. A lot of people envision, and we get this certainly in the fall, a Malibu or a Los Angeles, Santa Ana wind event where the fire moves 40 miles in 3 or 4 hours and takes out hundreds and hundreds of homes. And while that is not completely out of the picture here, we wouldn't expect that. We would expect a slower, more intense fire. So a couple of pictures of what that might look like. This is a nighttime burn that CAL FIRE did down in the Crowbar drainage south of Montaña de Oro. You can see that they started in this area, came down, and very quickly they got a very intense fire. It didn't burn really overly fast, but it did burn very intensely underneath the oak trees there. And none of those oak trees were killed by this fire. They were pruned a little bit and came back. This is another burn I did down again south of Montaña de Oro. Those are 75-foot bishop pines. The goal of this burn was from the ologists was to do a stand replacing fire. So that's why we put so much fire into there. But again, you see a very intense fire, but it took probably 15-20 minutes to climb up through these pines. So it's a slow-moving fire. But just an idea of what could happen under certain conditions. So to address those hazards, we came up with some projects. That was the abatement side of the CWPP. And so this year we tackled 4 different areas. The Las Encinas and Tierra Greenbelt, which is CSD-owned property. The Loma property, which is a small parcel at the end of Loma, and it is a CSD-owned property as well. The Broderson property, which is not the one that everyone's thinking about, and I'll show you a map here earlier. It's actually further up towards Cabrillo, again a CSD-owned property, and we tackled for the first time a privately owned piece of property, and we're calling it the Pratt property. It's that eucalyptus grove at the top of Cabrillo, and we did some thinning in there, as you'll see here shortly. So those are the 4 projects that we tried to address this year. Just to give you an idea, this is the mobile home park. This is state parks over here, and then this is a piece of CSD-owned land and the greenbelt that comes across there. I believe this over here is Tierra, and this is Las Encinas, and it comes all the way out to the cross, and then over here is the South Bay easement, and over here is Bay Oaks, and the Van Buren building is right there. So to give you an idea of where it was. So all this was mitigated this year, and I'll show you some pictures here shortly. Estimating that's probably about 8 or 9 acres. So this is the Upper Broderson. Again, it's CSD-owned property, and I believe it'll continue to remain CSD-owned property if I'm not mistaken. And then the Pratt property that we talked about, that's where the eucalyptus groves are at the top of Cabrillo. That was addressed as well. How we accomplished this was through a grant from the San Luis Fire Safe Council. The focus group put together an application. It was co-signed by the CSD, your general manager, and the board, as well as the focus group. We requested total of $36,000, or just a little bit over that actually. The initial purchase was $32,000. Towards the end of the life project, we had a few more, some more money come through, and so we actually grabbed another $4,000, so for a total of $36,000. The project was completed by local 3C members from the Los Padres camp out on Cuesta Camp, so it was local crews out. As part of that grant from the Fire Safe Council, they wanted the local landowners and the local responsible parties to have some buy-in on this. So they require a 50% or 50% matching effort or matching revenue. So for every dollar they grant the district, or in this case for these projects, they wanted us to shell out 50 cents. So how do we do that? Well, we did it through matching effort. Staff submitted, Amy Jones and I submitted over $21,000 worth of matching effort. That was this board's time, the Los Osos Focus Group's time, the Emergency Services Committee's time when they were building the CWPP. The CSD utilities supplied the chipper, and they used that exclusively through the life of the project. CAL FIRE, County Fire, sent folks out to help them and also provided the fuel to run that chipper and the routine maintenance for it. So there's really a group effort. Actually, staff, we expected, or we generated probably well over $30,000 worth of matching effort to this, but we only needed to capture that $21,000. So it was a very good project. So here's some pictures of what it looked like before they got in there. This is old growth oak and manzanita and coastal sage and some other stuff in there, but it's very thick, very dense, as you can see through there. Kind of hard to tell in this picture, but that's probably 15 to 18 foot tall. And here we have the now famous Mr. Wright standing in there. He's a good-sized guy, not as tall as Mike over there, but he is a good tall. Hand up like that, you can see how tall this brush is around him. This brush was growing actually on CSD property right up to the homes. And so there was an exposure to the homes from the fire in this, if it came across this brush patch. Afterwards, kind of a washed out picture, this is kind of the line of demarcation. The goal was to clear 100 foot from homes. And we based that 100 foot on Public Resources Code 4291 that says that that's the amount of clearance that a homeowner should have if they can clear up on their property. It's an industry standard. I walked this piece of parcel with the Fish and Wildlife Service. They cleared it for any of their threatened and endangered species issues, and she was very comfortable with that 100-foot clearance as well. So as you can see, there's big brush, and then we didn't remove the brush. We just thinned it out and limbed it up, and basically we gave it a manicure. One of the homes up there was some brush growing right up actually underneath the eaves, very seriously threatened by a wildland fire if one should come through here. I don't have a picture of this one with clearance, but here's another home that did have the same amount of brush up to it. Now it has defensible space, and that was the goal. Again, that 100-foot clearance is to provide defensible space. Again, you can see some of the oaks in there where it's cleaned up around there. If a fire should come across, it'll be a ground fire. It won't climb through the ladders, get into the upper trees, and then spot it into the homes. And that was our goal. Another before picture, just a huge old manzanita bush there. Same manzanita bush at a different angle. Again, it's just kind of trimmed around. We left some of the lower stuff, so we have different age classes in there, but got defensible space around the brush. Then we're going to move down to the Las Encinas and Tierra Greenbelt area. This is, again, CSD-owned property, fully overgrown with vines and ivy. Couldn't walk through there, a lot of poison oak, a lot of annual grasses that would turn, a lot of foot traffic through here, and very thick, very dense. It would have taken the firefighters, if there had been a fire in here, quite a while to work their way through with their hoses to actually get water to the fire. This is what it looks like now. Removed a lot of the ivy, removed a lot of the undergrowth, cleaned up a lot of the dead oaks, and removed that, chipped it all into CSD property, which is up over here, again with the help of the utilities department. So we're very grateful with all the efforts that those guys gave us. Another angle, this actually was being somewhat maintained by the local owners. They just, they didn't want their backyards all overgrown. So what we did find is that some of the areas we were able to get in and just bypass it because the local property owners were helping you out. Down in the Greenbelt, some of the folks were really serious about their native species, and so here's a pack rat's nest. They asked us to leave it, and we did, so that keep the habitat out there. And again, you can see behind it thinning out there. This is Mr. Pratt's property underneath the ukes. This is a very thick, very heavily uke stand, forested with new growth and old growth. And so what we did is we went through there and removed a lot of the smaller stuff and removed a lot of the droppings that were on the ground and chipped it right back in place. Everything was chipped. We didn't do any burning or removal, so all the biomass was never removed from the land. So by thinning it out, again, you create defensible space amongst the trees. You don't allow a ground fire to move from the ground to small brush to the smaller trees to the bigger trees, and therefore shoot embers off all over the Cabrillo area. We hope that this thinning will reduce the fire hazard in this area as well. One of the things that was important, especially talking with Fish and Game and Fish and Wildlife Service and state parks, who borders all of these properties that we're talking about, is to not remove the trees together or the brush together, but to thin them back. So in this case, here's a chamise stub. They had to remove the branch or the bush because it was very, very full of dead stuff. So they trimmed it on down, and now you can see the greenery. It's starting to sprout back out. So the root ball is still there, and in 15 years or so, this will be about a 4, 5, 6 foot tall chamise. So it's coming back quickly. One of the interesting things we found is on my mobile data computer, I pulled up to the end, I think this is the end of Travis, and we knew that there was a hydrant out there, but we couldn't find it. It was all surrounded with pampas grass, so the crews went back and opened it up for us. And actually, we probably could have gotten to it, but certainly it's much more accessible now. Here's a young oak tree, a couple inches tall, that was sprouting. This isn't regrowth, this is new growth. Once the canopy was removed and allowed sunlight to hit the ground, all those old oak acorns that were in there have now sprouted and are starting to come up. So that's another good sign. This is a limbed oak tree, obviously a pretty small guy, but once you limb them up, this new growth comes out, and this new growth is much more resistant to fire than old growth because it's young, it's vibrant, it's pushing sap through there, so that's a good sign as well. There is a lot of chips up there. Again, everything was chipped, so in this case you can see it's a pretty large pile. That pile is still up there, and there's another pile at the top of Travis as well. Folks have been going up there and getting it. It's great mulch for your land. There's not as much up there now because, again, thanks to the utilities department, Station 15 South Bay now has 3 or 4 loads of this stuff. So we again appreciate their efforts to help us here. And saved us a couple $100 of ground cover, excuse me. So if anyone's looking for chips, there's still chips up there. One of the things, though, that is going to come of this project is non-native return, or non-natives coming into this land, and it's our goal to have native growth come back. It's good for the environment, it's good for the animals that live up there. So I have talked with various groups in the community about trying to get some native plants planted back in there. There's not a lot of folks who have that ability to do it. There's some community members who are growing oaks and growing native brush, native grasses. We need to get them back in there. We need to try and get it in before non-natives take over the area. So this is a big pampas grass bunch. This is probably 4 or 5 foot round. This picture was taken approximately 30 to 40 days after it was cut back, and you can already see there's 15 or so inches of growth in there. The pampas grass will come back, so that's something we'll have to address at some point. The reason we need to address it is I've got a very fast-moving non-native here and a monkey flower off to the side, and the competition will be too much for the natives if it's not contained. So it's something that we need to deal with. So that's kind of what we wanted, that's kind of the projects we worked on, what we wanted to show you. What's next? Well, we spent $36,500 or so to do this section right here, and this section right there, and this section right there. Probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 11 acres. See, there's a lot of land that still needs to be addressed if you follow the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. So the focus group will be continually working with the Fire Safe Council to secure more grants in the future, and we're willing to take other suggestions if the community has any. That's in the long term. In the short term, we need to do some maintenance up there on those projects. We can submit grants to do maintenance on the existing projects. The problem with that, though, is most grants don't want to continue throwing money at the same project over and over and over. They expect that the local community, the landowners, the stakeholders will take responsibility for their land, and if it's important enough to throw grant money out, it's important enough to fund it themselves. So I can get grants probably for, the community can get grants for new projects. Very difficult to get grants to do maintenance on old projects. Another one of the suggestions is to try and develop a community program much similar to the Fairchild days that Ann works on, and that's called Chipping Day. All right. Do a chipping day, though, on your property and see if we can get local Boy Scout troop or the small wilderness area folks to come out and give us a hand and maintain some of these lands with us and try and develop community interest. The CSD or the county can maintain it. That's a long shot given the current fiscal restraints, but again, that's something we could do. Fire goats is an interesting concept. It's a very environmentally friendly concept. What happens is you contract with a goat herder. They'll come out, they'll put a fence up, they'll put a water trough in there, throw a bunch of goats out onto your property, and basically you pay them to feed their goats on your property. But the goats will fertilize as they go. They remove the brush and the branches at about 4 or 5 foot level, which is exactly what we want. They take out all the small stuff and creates that defensible space. We could elect to do nothing, and if you elect that, that's probably 15, 20, 25 years, you'll have the exact same growth again. We can do a combination of any of the above, or I'm open for suggestions, and the committee is here, the focus group is here. We're open for any other suggestions that you might have. So that's the presentation. I believe that Leon would like to say a couple words.
Mr. Golden.
Actually, I'd like to thank some other people who helped us get started on this particular project. First of all, Jim Bryant, who used to teach at Cal Poly or was involved with their fire program there, he's the guy who really started us on our way and introduced us to the concept of fire-safe focus groups. And then, this is a sad note, one of our original members, Jim Barber, who is no longer with us, was really a hard-working guy who worked with the committee, and we miss him. Also, I'd like to thank two people from Los Osos, who, one of whom used to be the fire chief in San Luis Obispo, Bob Newman. And then, of course, we have Matt Jenkins, whose son was here a few minutes ago, helping bring the breathing bottles in. And I think most of you know Matt. Then there was Dan Turner, who is a former county fire chief, also with CAL FIRE. And the current fire chief, Bob Lewin, who's been very supportive and helpful. Also, one cannot talk about doing anything around fire protection without mentioning Amy Jones, who works in the office and is someone you could really count on. In addition, two other members of the county CAL FIRE organization, Alan Peters and Greg Alex. And then we come to, last but not least, Phil Veneris. Now, without Phil's inspiration and without his hard work and without his amazing knowledge on the job that he does, we couldn't have been even a tad successful. And so I'm going to ask you, and I'm also going to ask the people at home, to please stand up and give Phil a round of applause, which he... And that concludes my comments.
Did he embarrass you enough?
Absolutely.
I would just like to make a couple of comments. I don't know if anybody else on the board does, but I know all the board members went out and looked at the defensible space clearing that was done this year, and I was just really, really impressed with it personally. I think the outcome of this is just unbelievable. Until you actually go out there and experience it in person, I just don't think you understand the scope of it. The defensible spaces that we're creating out there are obviously invaluable for the community. So I would really like to thank the focus group again, which is Tom and Michael Wright and Leanne Golden and Vita Miller. And I would like to mention that you will get certificates of appreciation, but unfortunately we had a communication breakdown, so I don't have those tonight to present to you, but you will be getting them hand-delivered to you. I also would like to thank, in addition to those people, the community members who served on our Emergency Service Advisory Committee, because I think they're also very, very active in this fire safety aspect of it. I know I was the liaison 3 years ago, and I know that those people, and some of the same people are on there, but I think that also the Emergency Service Advisory Committee deserves some thanks there also. And I also would like to, in following up with admitting that we messed up, I would also like to thank Tom Wright for the grant money and PG&E also, and you will also be getting certificates of appreciation, but unfortunately, again, we don't have those tonight, but we'll make sure you get those. I think it's just another token of the thanks that we have for all the cooperation that we've gotten from PG&E, and like I said, Tom's done a lot of work, just shows a commitment to the welfare of the community, and I really appreciate it. And my last comment is, Leon stole kind of my thunder here, but I think working on the being on the board and then also being on the Special Districts Association for the county and for the state, I have to say that we have one of the most well-respected fire chiefs in the state in Phil, and I really appreciate all the effort that Phil puts in, and I really hope he stays here. Thank you. Did any other director have any comments, or did I pretty much wrap it up? Yeah, Director Baltimore.
No. Yeah, personally, I just want to... Sorry, I think you're my mom. There you are. Am I on? Oh, cool. Okay. I just want to personally thank Lee for his bulldoggedness of working with my schedule in order to get me out there, because once you get out there and see it, you realize the problem that is out there and the mitigation and how much it helps. So I just want to personally thank him.
I have to second that, because he was patient with me getting my scheduling, got Craig and I out there together, so thank you, Lynn. Really appreciate it.
You good?
I'm good.
Okay. With that, then, what I'll do is I'm going to adjust my agenda right now, and then I'm going to move up the CAL FIRE Manager's report to right now, so the chief can get out here and do his #1 job, which is fire protection.
Okay, I appreciate that. You have before you the November 2011 Chief's Report, or Manager's Report for the Station 15. In November, we responded to 89 calls. 4 of those were simultaneous. All of those simultaneous calls required advanced life support. There were 55 medical calls, with 33 requiring advanced life support by the paramedics, 2 traffic collisions, and 7 incidents reported as fires. Company 15 returned to the station a total of 10 times to assist the CAL FIRE employees there. So statistically, not one of our busier years, but as you'll see next go around, 2011 was probably the second busiest, if not the busiest year since I've been around in Los Osos. For training, we're starting the training season in November, so we sent a couple brand new reserves to the San Luis County Volunteer Firefighter Academy. It started on the 12th. They've now since graduated, both successful, and are continuing on with other training to work to become reserve firefighters at the station. I anticipate in the next probably 2 or 3 months, we'll be back before this board having a pinning ceremony for them. Little information there on the project that we just talked about up at the Broderson. 3 Cs we ran out of grant funding for the 3 Cs, and so they actually came through and gave us probably 8 or 9 crew days out of their own funding just to try and finish the project. So they were very supportive to us, and we can't thank them enough. They weren't able to get all of the chipping done, so we went back out there, and Mark Bailey, one of the reserve firefighters, hauled up the chipper and chipped for 2 or 3 days and got it all cleaned up. So we finished that project in the end of November, and then we started the engine procurement process and started a couple meetings with County Fire and with Pismo Fire, CAL FIRE to come up with a good engine spec, and you'll be hearing more of that in the next coming year or next coming months. Is there any questions or concerns I can answer for you?
Yes, Director Baltimore.
Just to confirm, so we're on schedule with the engine purchase, correct?
We are on schedule. Just for the rest of the board, the goal right now is to have that back from all the committees and to look at. I probably won't have it by next Wednesday's ESC meeting because some of the folks who are giving us information on how the bids should work have not been able to get it back in time. But we will have it with the goal to bring it before the Emergency Services Committee sometime in February and bring it before this board for approval to put out as a request for proposal sometime early March.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Chief Veneris? Okay, we have a public question. Yes, Al.
Interesting presentation about the focus group. What is the burn index and the fuel? There are certain terms that firefighters use that gives the public the idea of the amount of burnable material there is and how wet it is or how dry it is. Mm-hmm. Could you just make a few comments about that, please?
Okay. Without getting too technical with you,
I was going to say that. Let's not go.
Probably the easiest way to do that is to give you some generic numbers. I tried to do a control burn today out at south of Montana de Oro. Weather didn't hold up for me with the incoming storm, but we did a fuel sample. And ideally, a good growing piece of brush will have a number, and just trust me on the number. In the wintertime, in the spring, it'll be in this area probably 175, 180, somewhere there. And it's a number that identifies how much water is in that bush. The more water in the bush, the less the more likely it's to resist fire, because anything wet's not going to burn. As it gets older, that number comes down. As it gets through the drought period, that number comes down. Even at the end of the summer, that number comes down. So after about 100, when it gets to about 100, 110, it starts to burn a little bit better. When it gets below 60, that's what they consider critical. Out on the coast, critical for us is probably 70, just because there's so much fog. When we sampled the fuel out there, the brush out there, the old growth chamise was at 64, and the new growth chamise was at 71. What that's telling us is they're both critical to burn right this instant, which is why we were trying to burn. But ideally, here in January, those numbers should be well over 120, 130 as it's starting to pull moisture up from a wet year. So we are in a very short-term drought right now. Talking with the folks to answer Al's long-term question, which I think is what you're getting at. They're not expecting a lot of rain this year. and we should continue with a below normal rainfall or precipitation, and probably below normal temperatures as well through the remainder of the winter into the spring.
Thank you. With that, then, we'll go ahead and close this portion of the agenda, and I'd again like to thank the Fire Safety Group, PG&E. Tom, are you embarrassed enough, or should we keep pouring on here? Okay, I'd like to thank you again very much. Okay, well, with that, we'll move into general public comment.